I'm a doctor, and my estranged dad of 30 years just became my patient. I want to tell him, but I don't know how. My father was my mother's dealer, and as soon as I was born, he immediately gave up all of his parental rights. I tried to get in touch with him in my younger days, and once he even agreed to meet up with me for coffee, but he never showed up. I'd already given up trying to connect with him, but recently something happened. I'm a doctor, and a few weeks ago, as I was checking my schedule, I saw that a patient with my father's exact name had an appointment booked with me. I figured it was just a coincidence, but when the time of the appointment came and I called the name into my office, my father walked in. I tried to appear as normal as possible and treat him like any other patient, but hearing my father's voice for the first time in my life hit me way harder than I ever imagined. I went to the bathroom in the middle of the appointment and violently sobbed. I debated whether or not to tell him, but I decided against it. That night, I went home and told my wife, Emily, everything. Her reaction was a mix of shock and concern. She said that this was my chance to finally get some closure, or maybe try to build a relationship with him. I didn't know if I could do that. I spent so long hating this man for leaving us, and to just reconnect like that just didn't seem realistic. She told me to just think about the idea and not to decide anything at the moment, and that's what I did. The next day at work, I was a mess. My head was filled with thoughts of me as a kid, this patient potentially being my father, and so much more. As I walked through the hospital corridors, I couldn't stop thinking about my father. I tried to focus on my patient, but his face, paired with the photo that was on my grandparents' nightstand, left me feeling like there was an empty space in my heart that needed to be filled. Over the years, it felt like that space was being filled with resentment for a man I'd never known. I begged God for a sign. My first patient of the day was a young boy with his father, both of them laughing and joking. Their bond was heartwarming and tugged at my heartstrings. I thought maybe this was a sign that I should try to build a relationship with my own father. But then, as I was leaving the room, I overheard a heated argument between a father and his teenage son in the waiting area. It made me reconsider my decision to talk to him because I had so much resentment towards him from my childhood that I wasn't sure if I could communicate with him well enough without it being an argument. Throughout the day, I paid close attention to my patients. I saw a father gently comforting his daughter after a difficult diagnosis, and I felt like I was missing out on the relationship I never had. But then, an elderly man came in alone, with no family by his side, reminding me of the isolation my father had chosen for himself all those years ago. During lunch, I sat in the cafeteria, picking at my food, lost in thought. When I was 7 years old, I loved school, but one thing always made me. I thought that he was my father. I felt 100% vulnerable in that moment, like a hermit crab out of its shell. He didn't say anything for a moment and looked at me. His face was soft. He then said that he knew for some time. I was shocked. I asked why he didn't say anything. He looked down at his hands. He said he didn't want to force anything on me and thought it would be better if I came to him on my own terms. I had expected denial, or maybe anger, but not this calm acceptance. I asked him why did he abandon us. He looked more sad now. He said it was a long story, and that he made a lot of mistakes when he was young and scared. He said he was dealing with his own demons, but admitted that leaving was the hardest thing he did. But at the time, he felt like it was the best option. I felt like the 7-year-old boy asking his mom why his dad didn't love him all over again. They kept giving me these vague answers, and it upset me. I told him that he was a coward for leaving me. A dad shouldn't leave his son and wait for his son to come around. I didn't ask to be here. He knocked up my mom, realized he couldn't be a father at that point, and dipped. Simple as that. I was tired of people coming to his defense and making up these vague excuses for him, and when I told him all of this, he sat in silence, almost looking embarrassed. He wouldn't make eye contact with me. All he could say was, he was sorry. After sitting in heated silence, he said that he wanted a relationship with me now, and that it was up to me if I wanted to accept him in my life again. He said it was no rush, and that I didn't have to make a decision now, but to call him if I wanted to. I had his phone number on file in the hospital records. I told him goodbye, and went back inside to tend to my other patients. The following days were a mess. I threw myself into my work, but my mind was nothing but thoughts of my dad. Emily noticed my distraction and asked me to talk about it. I told her that I didn't know what to do. A part of me wanted to give him a chance, but another part was still so angry. She said that it was okay to feel both at the same time. This was a weird time in my life, and I'd never been faced with a decision as big as this before. A few weeks later, I was at the hospital, finishing up my rounds when I saw my dad's name on the patient list again. This time, instead of dread, I felt a bit nervous. I couldn't keep avoiding this forever. After his checkup, I handed him a note with my phone number and told him to give me a call if he still wanted to talk. He looked at the note, then back at me, and smiled. As he left, I couldn't help but wonder if I was making the right decision. A few days later, my phone rang. I saw his number on the screen and hesitated before answering. I answered, and he asked me how I was doing and said he hoped we could meet up for coffee. I hesitated but then agreed. We made plans for the next day at 2 p.m. The next day, we met at the cafe. It was awkward at first, but as we talked, I began to see him not as the man who had abandoned me, but as a flawed human being trying to make amends. He shared more about his past, his struggles, and the mistakes he had made. I listened. Slowly but surely my anger turned into understanding. understanding. We continued to meet regularly, each conversation peeling back more layers of our past. One afternoon, over coffee, he told me about the dark period in his life when he left. He spoke of addiction, fear, and the overwhelming sense of failure he felt. He had thought leaving was the only way to protect us from his self-destructive behavior. He admitted that it wasn't an excuse for what he did, but he wanted me to know. It felt good to finally get a real answer for once in my life. He explained how he'd spent years trying to make himself better and hoped that one day he would find me and explain. Hearing his side was painful, but it also brought a sense of closure. I realized that holding on to my anger was only hurting me. Forgiveness didn't mean forgetting or excusing his actions, but it did mean freeing myself. One evening, as my dad and I sat on a park bench watching the sunset, he turned to me. He told me how proud he was of the man I became and how grateful he was to get a chance to meet me. I felt a lump in my throat and thanked him. Being told by your dad that he was proud of you for the first time definitely tugged on my heart, and I felt tears begin to form involuntarily. As we sat there, the past began to feel less like a weight and more like a lesson. Our journey wasn't easy, and there were still moments of doubt, but with each day, we built something stronger, and in that process, I found a sense of peace and closure I hadn't realized I needed. His health continued to be a concern, and there were moments when I was scared of losing him, just as we were starting to rebuild our relationship. One night, I stayed by his hospital bed, watching the monitors beep steadily. It hit me how fragile life was, and how important it was to cherish the time we had. During these moments, Emily was my anchor. She reminded me of the importance of family, of giving second chances, and of the strength found in forgiveness. In time, his health stabilized, and we began to share more of our lives with each other. He attended my medical conferences and showed genuine interest in my work. We shared dinners and holidays, and slowly, he became a part of my life in a way I never thought possible. One day, as we sat together in my living room, he turned to me with a serious expression. He told me that there was something that he'd been holding back. He said that when he left, it wasn't just about his own issues, but there were also people that he'd gotten involved with. They were dangerous people, and he had to leave to protect my mom. The revelation hit me like a punch to the gut. He said that he knew it probably wasn't the right thing to do, but he said that he never stopped loving me, and that every day he wished he could have come back. His addiction had led him to steal and borrow money from some really bad people, and he didn't want to bring that danger to my mom's doorstep. This helped me fully understand the reasons, but it still hurt to think about.